Hello, welcome to the last lecture of this year at the museum. I'm Beth. I'm a university paleontology student at Bristol, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the Piscivore biomechanics of Spinosaurids. Now, I feel like there will be those of you in here who might not understand what this technical jargon means, so we'll break it down a bit further. Piscivore biomechanics, Spinosaurus. What does it mean? Piscivore simply is just a fish eater, something that eats fish. Biomechanics is the study of movement and structure of living organisms to understand how they function. And Spinosaurid is simplistically a member of the Spinosaur family, which we will get into now. That's the breakdown of what we're doing. So this is the Spinosaurid family. They are a group of medium to large theropod dinosaurs. They first emerged at the very end of the Jurassic, but split into their two subgroups in the early Cretaceous. Now, the two groups, two sides of the groups are the Baryonychinae, which tend to be a lot more similar to that of Baryonyx, who is one of the main species we're going to be focusing on today. The other main species we're focusing on is Spinosaurus, which is part of the other subgroup. As you can see, there's quite a wide range of diversity within the group, and most of the species that we find are in Africa or Europe. There are a couple from Asia and South America, none yet to be found in North America, although who knows what we'll come across in the next few years. So, first of all, let's start off with morphology. Now, morphology is the form, shape, and structure of an animal and its bodily features. And as paleontologists, morphology is all we have to go off, all we have are the bones. So understanding their shape and structure and how they function in relation to this animal is incredibly important. And it's also important to compare them to modern day animals, as again, that's all we have. And we will be looking at, in this section, Baryonyx on the left and Spinosaurus on the right. They're the two main species looked at during research, as they have the largest fossil collection and the best preserved fossils, so they're best to study and look at. Their first main feature, importantly, is their retracted nostrils, which are the nasal holes, which usually in theropod dinosaurs open up right at the very front of the snout here and there. In both these two, but all Spinosaurids in general, they are positioned significantly further back on the snout. In the Baryonyx and its subgroup members, they're not quite as far back as that of Spinosaurus, and Spinosaurus, as you might see as we go on through this, tends to take a lot of these features to a much more extreme. As you can see in this comparison, the hole is significantly smaller and it sits right under the eyes. And it's the most extreme of any of the Spinosaurids. The next feature is a distal mandibular rosette, and simply it is basically the bulge at the end of the upper and lower jaw. Now, this bulge generally has much larger teeth attached to it, and also will usually have a notch behind it, at least on the upper jaw, and it's this notch where the bulge rosette of the lower jaw will slot in into place in between the two bulges right here. Now, this morphology is seen in modern day animals, in conger eels, and they have this feature because it is useful in dark and murky waters that they live in to help snatch prey. Fish tend to be very slippery, so if you have these straight conical teeth, but also this catching, snapping structure in the jaw, catching a fish right in between there, it's not going to slip out of your mouth, it's not going to swim away, it's dead and you can eat it. The next structure is the neurovascular system. Now, all Spinosaurids have this, but again, it's the most extreme in Spinosaurus. And on the very end of that rosette, that bulge, is lots of these little holes, these pits. Inside these pits, we think are a sensory network that can detect water movements. And we think that because they're very similar to the pit structure found in the snouts of crocodiles. And crocodiles have these pits to house detection sensors for movement in water. That's what allows crocodiles to sit and lay at the bottom of rivers waiting for animals to come and drink. And it's those movements of them drinking or splashing in the water which they receive and then come out and snap, pulling it back down into the water. So it's very interesting that Spinosaurus have these. And it probably is used for a similar sort of lifestyle. The other feature is their conical teeth. Conical just means straight. Most theropod teeth are curved and serrated. It means that they can sort of slice and dice at their prey and at the flesh. Conical teeth are usually entirely circular through their axis and lack serrations entirely. We see this a lot in animals that, again, tend to eat fish, because something that's curved and serrated is just going to slip off the slippery skin of the fish, but conical teeth, a bit like a spear, will spear right through it. The only difference is that Bionics and the other members of the Bionics subgroup, their teeth are slightly smaller and have an ever so slight recurve to them. Spinosaurus and its subgroup tend to have to not have this recurve at all, and also they have a much higher variation in their tooth size, ranging from teeth that can be anywhere from like this big to really tiny, usually the tiny ones fitting in between the notch and behind the rosettes, and the rosettes having the big long teeth. And last thing is something called a secondary palate. We all have a secondary palate. Mammals have secondary palates, and it's a structure that fits atop the roof of the mouth, and it separates the mouth from the nasal cavities. It's what allows us to breathe and eat at the same time. But it's also what allows crocodiles to stay submerged underwater without intaking that water, while still being able to breathe through their nose if their nose is reaching the surface. And no other dinosaur has a secondary palate. Well, no other theropod dinosaur has a secondary palate other than Spinosaurids. And this is all put together, but that's quite complicated, which is why we split it up. So we know the morphology, we know the main features, important features for a piscivore lifestyle, but how can we test them? It's all well and good making these comparisons to modern day animals, but do they actually function how we think they'd function? This is where running analysis and biomechanics comes into it, actually testing whether they do what we think they do. So the first one is this. It's an FEA analysis from 2007. And basically FEA just stands for finite element analysis. And in simpler terms, they tested how well the upper jaw of 4 different animals could respond to stress exerted on the skull when it was biting. The skulls they looked at were a generic theropod skull, an alligator, a gharial, and baryonyx. So the darker coloured areas represent areas of low stress, with the red areas representing areas of high stress. And they found a couple of things in this analysis. First of all, in baryonyx, they ran the analysis first without the secondary palate, and then ran it again with the secondary palate to see if this extra structure aided or was entirely neutral in how their skull handles stress. And they found actually having the secondary palate in place actually helped their skull distribute that stress a lot easier, and it meant that it could disperse the stress, and its skull was less, I guess, had more structural integrity, is the right way to put it. Second thing they found is that the gharial and the baryonyx shared very similar stress distributions, unlike that of the alligator and the theropod. Now, this is important because Gharial is a fish specialist. It's not like its crocodile or alligator brethren. It doesn't death roll in the water. It purely hunts small fish. So for baryonyx to also handle stress on the skull in the same way is very important and links back into this idea that it is a piscivore and that its jaw is built for that piscivore lifestyle. There was also another similar analysis done, but with Suchomimus, and they found that actually Suchomimus, and we presume the rest of the Spinosaurids, the part of the skull that produces the most pressure, aka the part of the skull that is able to bite the hardest, is actually the front end, the end that has that rosette and that notch. The area that's perfectly designed for prey capture is the area that can produce the highest bite force and also deal with the most stress. A similar analysis was done in 2013, but this time it included the American alligator, the Gharial, Sanders-South crocodile, and Spinosaurus, as well as baryonyx. And again, it was looking at stress, but also the different types of stress and how much of each stress the skulls could handle. So the three stresses they looked at was dorsiventral, which is basically just up and down, mediolateral, side to side, and torsion, which is twisting complex movements. And they found that the American alligator can handle all of them quite well, which again makes sense of its lifestyle. It has this broad, big snout. The stress is distributed quite evenly, but also, as we know, alligators and crocodiles, they are able to capture prey significantly larger themselves, and they have this amazing way of tearing off chunks of flesh by death rolling. Their skulls can withstand that, the torsion, the mediolateral and dorsiventral loading of that entirely. The Gharial and slender-snouted crocodile are better designed for dealing with dorsiventral bending. Again, those two have significantly smaller, thinner, elongated snouts, and both of them are better evolved for catching small, slippery fish. Interestingly, Spinosaurus and baryonyx also had very good resistances to dorsiventral bending, this up and down motion. They did not deal with side to side or torsion very well. Baryonyx did perform the best out of any, even over the Gharial and the sand-snouted crocodile. But the interesting thing here is that Spinosaurus and baryonyx are significantly bigger than any of the other three species. So their skulls were taken and scaled down to the size of the others. So they could all be compared equally. And it was found that actually when they were scaled for size, both skulls, Spinosaurus in particular, performed horribly in all the different types of bending and loading and stresses, which is incredibly interesting because Spinosaurus, a dinosaur that is anywhere between 15 meters and 18 meters long, it's one of the biggest dinosaurs that we found and know of. You'd expect it to be able to have some stress and pressure resistance in its skull, yet it has none. And by the looks of it, the only way they was able to withstand these stresses was purely by nature of its size, not by the structure of its jaw. Baryonyx is a bit different. Baryonyx seems to have, even when scaled, still has relatively good dorsiventral up and down resistances, but still not great. It's not ideal for them. Now, this is from 2020, and this is the skull of Irritator, a fellow Spinosaurid, and this is what's known as an endocast. Endocast is basically a cast of the brain case, and understanding the structure and shape of a brain is very important and tells us a lot about how an animal functioned, in that different parts of the brain control different things, and the size and shape of that area of the brain will indicate to us how that animal might use that function. For example, T-Rex has a very large part of the brain dedicated to smell. Therefore, we assume or can infer that probably had a very good sense of smell. And when looking at the brain of Irritator, it was found that its snout, its jaw, was best held. Well, the animal would prefer to hold its head in a downwards inclined posture, a bit like a heron, a bit like this, specifically at 45 degrees, and that it could move its head quite rapidly and coordinated in up and down motion, which again links back to the previous analysis that we looked at, in that their skulls were relatively good at withstanding the up and down motion. But also that this posture makes a lot of sense in regard to their eyesight. You see, if you have a big snout, that's going to get in the way of your eyesight, particularly if you're not something like a crocodile. Crocodiles tend to have their eyes sitting further above their snout. It's almost like on a crest of their head, so they're able to see over their snout. With most Spinosaurids, their eyes are in level with their snout. So having it pointed down allows them to still have that forward-facing binocular vision, which, is quite useful to see your prey. That's a benefit. And also this head posture, this downwards inclined head posture, is generally associated with Piscivore. If you look at pelicans or herons, they have their head held back like this, so they can make quick snatching motions with their beaks. So it makes a lot of sense for the Spinosaurids to have this head posture, and it further aligns with the research that we looked at earlier, in that the forces their skull can withstand. Now, the last one of the biomechanics is actually from this year, so it's a relatively recent paper. There's a little bit of controversy surrounding it. I think that's because it's quite new and very bizarre research into what it's theorizing. And it's theorizing that Irritator, the same one that we looked at before, was able to split the bones in its lower jaw, which is known as lateral mandibular spreading, to almost create like a gullet in its mouth, to help capture larger prey. And their research also sort of further affirmed this idea that they were good at fast, rapid snatching motions with their neck and skull morphology. So we have the biomechanics, we have the morphology. It's all starting to make sense, things are aligning. But do we actually have any proof? It's all well and good making comparisons with modern day animals and running these biomechanics, but is there physical fossil proof that they were piscivores? Well, you see, in 1997, a baryonic specimen was described, and they found within this baryonyx two very important things. Firstly, and importantly for this conversation, acid-etched scales of a fish known as Lepidotes, a fish that we actually have on display in the museum. So if you'd like to have a look at it afterwards, feel free. It's in probably cabinet right here on the other side of the wall. Now, acid-etched just means that these fish scales and these teeth have been sat in some sort of corrosive substances for a given amount of time, something, for example, like stomach acid. The second thing they found was disarticulated remains of a young iguanodon, also showing this abrasion and this acid etching. So clearly this baryonyx had been eating fish, but also had been eating iguanodon, which I know you may be thinking, this doesn't align with this piscivore lifestyle we've been discussing. Why is it eating dinosaurs? It shouldn't be doing that. Well, we believe that at least the Spinosaurids were only partially piscivores. Yes, they had the morphology for it, they had the biomechanics for it. However, being a specialist piscivore is a big risk to take, a risk that some of the Spinosaurids did take and would actually become their downfall. You see, most of them, for example, baryonyx, as we saw earlier, they had these piscivore morphologies, but not to the same extreme as that of Spinosaurus. They still had the ability to generalize. You see, if your river that you hunt in, it dries up in a drought, you have no fish. What are you going to do? You're still going to eat. The Baryonyx and other Spinosaurids are still able to go out and hunt iguanodon or hunt other animals. For example, a young pterosaur. They found a small pterosaur in Brazil with the conical, straight, unique teeth of a Spinosaurid embedded in one of its vertebrae. Another example of their ability to generalize. They evolved for piscivore, but again, specialism doesn't always work out. As we can see sometimes, for example, in Spinosaurus itself, Spinosaurus took its piscivore features to a whole new extreme, and we believe that the extreme that it took it to actually probably became its downfall, as it became so specialized that when its environment inevitably changed, its food source ran out. It didn't have the capabilities to go and compete against other dinosaurs that were much better suited at hunting terrestrial prey than it was. There was no way that it can compete. And with an animal at the size of 15 meters, there's no way it could sustain itself on small things like small pterosaurs or things that it would scavenge. So they died out. And the thing that allowed it to exploit a niche and become so big was also its downfall. So, putting it all together, what does all this look like? If you came across a Spinosaurid, its natural habitat, hunting, what would it look like? Well, first of all, we have a recap. The narrow, elongated rosette jaws, their complex neurovascular system, allowing them to detect water movements underwater, their reduced and retracted nostrils, the conical, straight, spear-like teeth, and their ability to withstand dorsiventral up and down stresses, as well as to produce rapid head movements. It would probably look something like this. This is a Spinosaurus. That's a fish. It would probably wade out into the rivers or swamps that they lived in, sticking the probably half of its jaw into the water. With its highly placed nostrils, it's still able to breathe. Again, with that secondary palate as well, able to breathe it'll be able to breathe while not intaking water. But because its snout is submerged, it can make use of that neurovascular system, make use of being able to detect water movements. The fish swimming towards it, it can feel that, it can sense that, but it doesn't have to see the prey to necessarily catch it. It just has to know that it's right in front of it. It feels that, the head comes in, snatches, caught between the rosette and the notches, speared on the conical teeth. It can then take the fish back onto the beach and eat it, and then go back out to get more food. That is probably how they hunted and lived their day-to-day lives, unless the rivers were in a drought, of which they would probably struggle and try to generalize as best they can until the fish and waters return. Looking something a little bit like this. And I think I quite like Spinosaurs for this reason. I think they're very unique. I think they're incredibly bizarre looking. I mean, the sail and the tail. The tail and the ability to swim is a whole other thing. That could be a whole other lecture that I won't get into now, partly because it's still an ongoing debate. But I think they're incredible creatures, bizarre, that took this strange, weird morphology and were able to exploit this riverside generalist hunter role so well, as they existed through nearly to the end of the Cretaceous. They didn't quite make it. They died out a bit before the end of extinction, but they got a good way through the Cretaceous, and I think they've made a lasting impression on paleontology, and I hope you will have enjoyed them as much as I loved them. And thank you for listening, and have a happy new year. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And also, I